Edie, it's lovely to chat to you today. Tell us a little about yourself and what you do.
Sure. So let's see. Well, I'm originally from the United States. I have lived in the UK for, my goodness, over 20 years now. I'm a journalist, so I have a podcast which is all about the sustainable development goals. It's called the Global GoalsCast. And we tell the stories of the champions making the world a better place. We have a real focus on equity, on inclusion, and we are passionate about telling the stories of women all over the world. So I love doing that. I've used my communication skills to do emceeing and hosting events. And I also help train other people to open their mouths. And I'm really passionate about working with women, especially because I feel that sometimes women aren't always given those skills and empowered to speak up for themselves. So that's what I do.
Edie, and we all need that. I'm the first new client, I think. Tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. Well, I'm from California, and I originally I studied poli-sci in undergrad. I went to the East Coast and studied international relations. I ended up working in the Organization of American States, which is like the United Nations, but just for the Western Hemisphere, as a political analyst. I went to New York City, worked for a hedge fund as a political analyst. I then came to London as a political analyst. And then I finally realized, you know what? I'm doing a lot of writing of things, and I'm not sure anyone's really reading them. But what I really enjoyed doing was going on places like Bloomberg TV and talking about politics and the combination or the intersection between politics and economics, currencies and bonds. So I went to Bloomberg TV and did that. I was politics and economics correspondent there. When I started having kids, part-time work was not an option at Bloomberg TV. So I left. I organized some festivals I organized a London Paris festival, organized a festival on climate change. And then I found my way back into journalism. I wrote for the Spectator business magazine. I was associate editor there, wrote the business pages of the Week magazine. And then I started back into video. So I met someone who offered me a job going to the climate summits and reporting and doing interviews there. And I eventually became editor of a company called Hub Culture. And I've been very, very lucky to find people along the way that I really click with and who we work really well together. And so we've built an incredible business which goes to important moments in time, sets up shop, and I do all of the content creation. That led me to creating a podcast with somebody else I met along the way, an amazing woman called Claudia Romo Edelman. We have this podcast that's been going for 3 years, and along the way, when I needed more time, figuring out how to earn some money while I wasn't a journalist. I started doing communication training. I still do that, probably, I don't know, 40% of what I do. But I really love picking the clients that I work with now, because I do think that is really important to me, and I'm sure to you, to work with people that you really care about and that you want to help along the way.
Yeah, makes all the difference. Edie, thank you for telling us that. I'm wondering what motivates you in the different things that you do.
So I love finding a story that really illustrates a message. I think that, part of the problem or part of the reason that things go wrong in business, personal life, whatever, is that communication can break down. And sometimes the best way to get your message across is to illustrate a point with an example. And at the moment we're in the middle still of the pandemic. It may feel like we're coming out of it in the UK, but as you know from your work in Africa, we are in the worst point in the 18 months of the pandemic right now. And on the podcast, on the Global GoalsCast, I've been talking a lot about how the vaccine inequity and the way that the richer countries are approaching the use of the vaccine means that we are prolonging this whole thing for everyone. Now, I can just talk about that and it sounds like, okay, well, whatever, Edie. But if I tell you the story of Emma Ngaiza, who's a frontline healthcare worker in Kenya, in Nairobi, it really illustrates this point. So the week I received my first vaccine shot, I interviewed her. She's a frontline healthcare worker. She works in one of the biggest slums in Nairobi. She had COVID for 2 months, couldn't go to work. She's a single mother. Her son fell quite far behind in school. He was 6 years old. He couldn't do online learning really by himself, and she couldn't see him because she had COVID. There was so much stigma around having COVID in Kenya that she didn't want to tell anyone. So she didn't tell anyone why she was at home sick. So things were pretty bad for her. Her kid actually had to leave that school. He fell behind, a year behind in school. She, when I interviewed her and asked her, well, what do you say to those rich countries who are moving on from vaccinating their frontline healthcare workers? They're vaccinating the over 50s and now below. She said, I don't think that it's entirely fair. And I would ask the world to think about us. So, I have that story. I have stories from Mozambique. I know that you have stories as well. And so that's the thing that sort of motivates me at the moment is trying to get this story out that it's not, it's not over, and it's really not over until it's over everywhere. We talk, about the Indian variant. There's going to be a variant from somewhere else. There's going to be 3 or 4. So until we, as a globe, decide to use COVAX, which has been set up exactly to do this, to help countries all over the world vaccinate equally, I'm afraid this is going to go on and on and on. So, I'm passionate about finding something that needs illustrating and then doing just that, finding the story that does that. That's kind of what gets me up in the morning.
I think I'm very similar in that. Yeah, thank you, Edie. That's really important, I think. And God, we could talk about each one of those things for hours. Edie, what do you think is your superpower? What makes you successful in what you do?
Wow. I love communicating. I love speaking to people. I love interviewing people. I love listening. So I love sitting back and just listening to somebody incredibly intelligent or somebody's life experience who can bring something to me. I also love questioning, researching, really figuring something out and having the time to do that. So that's in a sort of work sense. Out of work, I love anything that gets me outside. So at the moment, I'm trying to find different ways to be creative because we've all had to slightly reinvent ourselves. So I'm afraid I'm spending a lot of time in my garden. So this morning I was doing a lot of picking up of slugs, but the more interesting side of that is designing what I look at.
Yeah, it's become so important for all of us. Edie, and what would your top tips be for other women?
Well, I'd love to hear what your top tips are, but personally, I am a strong believer in finding people that you really get along with, that you click with, and seeing if you can work with them. While being very mindful that it's important to find people with different skills than yours, and being, of course, mindful that you need people that represent things that you have no ability to be able to do. I never had a mentor. I've definitely had tour mentors along the way. I just don't think that was part of the big companies and organizations that I worked with, that wasn't a thing when I was coming up in the ranks. And I left to do my own thing, I guess, quite early on. So I've sort of had to create that network of people. But I would say that building a network and finding groups that you can belong to that introduce you to other people who are different from you, who have different skills than you, but that you get along with, for me has been incredibly important and empowering. I don't know if that makes sense or what you were looking for.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think that's a lot of feedback I get from other women, to find a like-minded group of often women, actually, that support you and inspire you on your journey.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Edie, where do you see yourself in 5 years' time?
Well, I am working on scaling my business at the moment. So in 5 years' time, my dream is to be traveling a little bit more than I am at the moment, which is not very much. I would like to be I'd like to be telling more stories. I'd like to be telling more stories through the podcast, maybe through other means, but I'd really love to be able to share the stories of the champions who make the world a better place wherever they are, especially those stories about women who are doing just that, because I think you know as well as I do that women are able to do many things at once. And the more that we can show that women can do, I think the better the world will be.
I agree. Thank you, Edie, so much for sharing that.
Thank you so much for having me.